this past weekend, a new Hunger Games movie, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, opened in theaters. So it's time to rank all 5 Hunger Games movies from worst to best. And there will be spoilers, so watch at your own risk. But before I rank each individual film, I need to praise what every film in this franchise gets right. The franchise as a whole gets the hair, makeup, and costumes all very well done. Donald Sutherland plays a great villain in the films focusing on Katniss. The whole world of Panem is very intriguing, and the films make you feel a lot of emotion for the characters when they die. So here's my thoughts on the franchise. Now here's my ranking of each individual film. Coming in last place at number 5 is Mockingjay Part 2, mostly because the ending is a little unsatisfying. The writer kills off Prim just so there's an excuse to close the love triangle, and it feels very contrived. Some of the lore is glossed over, such as why there's a person who looks like a cat. The reveal that Coin is just as bad as Snow is a bit sudden, and while the film does have a lot of action, a lot of it feels like watching someone play a third-person shooter game. The characters infiltrate a base, but then they have to shoot monsters, and then they have to avoid bombs, and they have to sneak into somewhere. It all feels like a very big video game. Number 4, The Hunger Games. And again, the main problem with the movie is it feels like we start in the middle, and a lot of the lore is missing, such as the origin of the Mockingjays and the war that led to the capital taking power and starting the Hunger Games, and what exactly this three-finger salute means and the significance of it. And no, it's not the Boy Scout salute, just so you know. This is all explained in great detail in the book, but the movie just rushes past it. And for some reason, the film has a lot of shaky cam, and the characters don't really look starved enough. However, the advantage of it being a movie as opposed to a book told in first person is that we do get to spend more time with other characters such as President Snow and Seneca Crane, and we get to see more of how they try to use Katniss as a tool to manipulate. In the books, this is information she would not have known because it's from her point of view, but the movie goes, well, this is from the audience's perspective, so we can have more scenes with Snow and the other game makers, and we can see how they're trying to manipulate. So that was well done. Number 3, Mockingjay Part 1, mostly because a lot of it is filler. The director has actually gone on record in saying, if I could go back and do it again, I would not have split this film into 2 parts. And oh boy, I wish he had made that decision in the first place. Because the book of Mockingjay is no more or less longer than the other books in the series, so there wasn't really any excuse to split this into 2 films other than it was corporate greed. A lot of time is spent with the characters just sitting and talking when they should be making plans to overthrow the Capitol. About 75% of the movie feels like filler and setup, but I will say that the hanging tree montage is one of the most powerful scenes in this franchise. Number 2, Songbirds and Snakes. The aesthetic in this movie looks fantastic. The set designers, director, and cinematographer all did a great job of making the world of Panem look very depressing and war-torn. And a huge complaint that a lot of people have with the first movie is that none of the characters look starving, but in this one, they make sure they show you that, yes, the people in the districts are starving. The first time we see young Snow, he is basically skin and bones. The film does a great job of expanding the lore of the world of Panem. A lot of elements that were barely touched on are glossed over completely in the other films, such as the origin of the Mockingjays and the events that led the Capitol to start the Hunger Games in the first place. Those get explored a bit deeper here, and if you've seen the other ones, there's a lot of nice callbacks, such as the Hanging Tree scene, and what exactly the Hanging Tree was, and why that song was written. And it's a little bit more ironic when you realize that the Hanging Tree song was written by President Snow's first love, and then by the end of the franchise, it's now being sung by his greatest enemy as an act of rebellion. Now, a lot of the references are sort of shoehorned in, like Katniss roots being his girlfriend's favorite plant. That's a little bit out there. It's just as sort of a forced callback. I read that, though, it was great, and I actually cared about the love story between Snow and Lucy in this one, whereas in the Katniss films, I honestly didn't care less who she ended up with. I just wanted to overthrow President Snow, and I found the love triangle aspect a bit thin. Here, I actually cared about Snow as a character and what happens with his relationship. The film does a great job of showing just how despicable the people in the Capitol are. I mean, it's already horrific when you're sending teenagers off to murder each other for sport, and here it makes that worse by showing that the Capitol thinks of the tribunes as nothing more than animals in a zoo, and not even children with disabilities such as a missing limb, blindness, or Down syndrome are spared from the horrors of the games. And the Capitol even takes bets on who's going to last longest and even laugh when certain children are murdered. The film does a great job making you feel angry for what they do, and the cast in this film is fantastic. This is the first movie for young Snow's actor Tom Blythe. He does a phenomenal job of showing the tragedy of what happens to his character as the events of the film for him get more and more tragic. Jason Schwartzman gives a great performance as the host of the Hunger Games. You hate his character because he's hosting such a horrific event, but he also brings a bit of a charm to it at the same time, and that's how the people of the Capitol are. Burt Gorman, he is great as the villain in the second half of this movie. Viola Davis gives a great performance. All around, fantastic cast who all give fantastic performances. Now, I do recommend watching the movies first because a lot of the events and references are a bit more meaningful, some in a painfully tragic, ironic way. Now, unfortunately, the way the film is structured is a bit awkward. Similar to the Snyder Cut Justice League or The Creator earlier this year, the film is divided into parts, so it feels more like a mini-series that was later edited into a film, because some of the time jumps and transitions come a bit suddenly without much segue. I also feel there was a lot more story that could have been explored. With the first 300 games, they waited until the author had completed the trilogy of books before optioning them as films, but here this feels like the first of a trilogy, or the first season of a TV show. It doesn't really end with Snow's rise to power, so it feels more like it to be continued, and the problem with that is that there aren't any more books as of me making this video, and I haven't heard the author say that she intends to continue the story, so it feels a lot more compelling ideas about Snow's ascendancy and what led him to become as despicable as he is are there, but I blame that more on the author, but it's still worth watching. Number 1, Catching Fire. The games of the sequel are even more intense, the stakes feel higher, the world is expanded, the new tributes are all very likable and you care what happens to them, as opposed to the first movie where most of the tributes are out to get Katniss. The tributes in this one are allied with her, and the way this movie ends has you hungry for more, pardon the pun. Overall, it is better directed, better written, and the most exciting, so it comes in at number 1 as my favorite Hunger Games film. Let me know your thoughts on the Hunger Games franchise, and I will see you next time.